He had the voice of an angel, but Smokey Robinson was living through hell. Behind the Motown legend's velvet vocals were secrets that shook his legacy. Addiction, a hidden child, a secret affair with Diana Ross, and a bitter court battle with his ex-wife. While the world saw a star, Smokey was wasting away, physically and emotionally, losing friends, fighting for his music, and barely holding it all together. The more he tried to escape his past, the more it pulled him back into chaos. So who was the real man behind that famous smile? Long before Smokey Robinson became the legendary voice of Motown, he was just a skinny kid trying to survive in a city that didn't forgive weakness. Packed into a tiny Detroit home with 11 relatives, some family, some strangers, privacy was a luxury no one could afford. If you could breathe, you could share a bed. The streets outside were a dangerous symphony of broken dreams, shattered records, and heroin-filled alleyways. But Smokey wasn't made for the streets. He was made for music. By 17, he had written over 100 songs. None recorded, all memorized. He didn't form the miracles for fame. He did it for survival. Every verse, every harmony was a lifeline, pulling them one step away from poverty. When Berry Gordy heard Shop Around, he didn't just hear a hit, he saw the future. Smokey wasn't just a singer, he was Motown's secret weapon. Almost overnight, Smokey Robinson became the polished face of young Black America. Impeccable hair, dazzling smile, and a voice that could stop traffic. He married Claudette Rogers, the group's only female member, and the only person who could match his talent, note for note. From the outside, it looked perfect. The hits, the marriage, the suits, the dream. But behind that flawless facade, something was already starting to unravel. And Smokey Robinson, the icon in the making, was quietly beginning to crack. Diana Ross and Smokey Robinson were more than just Motown royalty. They were two stars caught in the same orbit, spinning closer with every late-night studio session, every rehearsal, every whispered conversation behind closed doors. Their careers mirrored each other's. Both handpicked by Berry Gordy, both rising fast as trusted voices of the label. And as they spent more time together, the professional lines began to blur. While Smokey was still married to Claudette Rogers, he quietly began a relationship with Diana. He wouldn't admit it publicly until 2023, more than 4 decades later. It wasn't some scandalous fling, he said. It just happened. It unfolded slowly during their years of working side by side, even as Claudette stepped back from touring to raise their children. Smokey, meanwhile, was on the road in the spotlight and growing closer to Diana. At Motown events, they were often seen standing side by side. The chemistry was undeniable in photos, though no headlines ever exposed it. Inside the label, whispers circled. Many suspected, few dared ask. When Smokey finally spoke, he described the affair as emotional, intense, and hard to walk away from. It ended, he said, because he realized he still loved Claudette and didn't want to break her heart any further. But the damage had already been done. Claudette had lived through the betrayal in silence, away from cameras and headlines. The affair became one more crack in a marriage already stressed by fame, distance, and temptation. Smokey's time on the road and the secrets he carried took their toll. Claudette, once a steady figure by his side, began fading from public view. Their collaborations slowed. So did their communication. By the late 70s, Smokey was showing up alone more often, and by 1986, the marriage was officially over, splintered not just by Diana, but by years of growing apart in every way that mattered. Still, the affair with Diana Ross left a permanent imprint on Smokey's legacy. It wasn't gossip, it wasn't speculation, it was real. He said it himself, it happened. And yes, it started while I was still married. Smokey Robinson's secret affair with Diana Ross may have ended, but the cracks it left in his marriage never fully healed. The distance between Smokey and Claudette only deepened. They stopped performing together, stopped traveling together, and by the early 1980s, they were no longer living like husband and wife. Then came the final blow, something Claudette had warned him about from the very beginning. Don't bring me diseases, don't bring me babies. But that's exactly what happened. While still legally married, Smokey began another relationship, this time with a woman outside the music industry. The result was a son, born in secrecy. For a while, Smokey kept it hidden until the guilt became too heavy to carry. When he finally told Claudette, her response was swift and final. She asked him to leave. Years later, he said plainly, "I don't blame her. Most women draw the line there." Claudette had already endured more than most, years of emotional distance, infidelity, and silence. But the arrival of another child made the situation unfixable. In 1986, after 27 years of marriage, they officially filed for divorce. It was the end of a union that had started before Smokey was even famous. Together, they had built a life, raised 2 children, and created timeless music. But love alone couldn't hold it together anymore. After the divorce, Claudette faded from the spotlight, choosing not to speak publicly about the pain. When she did speak, it was only about the music. Smokey, on the other hand, grew more reflective with time. He never denied what happened. He admitted it all, the affair, the child, the unraveling of his home, and called it a turning point in his life. The child born from that relationship never entered the public eye, but his existence marked the moment Smokey's world shifted forever. His family was fractured, his marriage was gone, and the emotional fallout would soon spill over into the next chapter of his life, one marked by breakdown, addiction, and the long road to redemption. The divorce didn't just end Smokey Robinson's marriage, it shattered his rhythm, his routine, and eventually his identity. What followed were the darkest years of his life. He vanished from the public eye, slipping into a spiral of addiction that nearly killed him. For the first time since the birth of Motown, Smokey stopped recording regularly. The tours slowed to a crawl. The writing dried up. He started missing meetings, or showing up gaunt, exhausted, and unrecognizable. This was the early 1980s, and the once polished image of Smokey Robinson, always smooth, always in control, was coming undone. On stage, the suits still fit. Off stage, they hung from his shrinking frame like ghosts of the man he used to be. His weight dropped to just 120 pounds on a 5'11" body. His voice lost its warmth. His eyes looked hollow. He later said he felt like a walking corpse. So thin he had to pin his pants together with a safety pin because even the smallest size no longer fit. I got to that point where I was just walking around. I didn't have belts. I didn't have pants that fit. I had to use a safety pin to keep them on. Friends noticed. Some said nothing, unsure what to say. Others chalked it up to stress. But behind closed doors, Smokey had crossed a line. After years of avoiding hard drugs, even when cocaine was everywhere in the music scene, he finally gave in. What began as casual use turned into a daily ritual. Studio sessions were forgotten. Business meetings became missed calls. The rhythm that had once fueled Motown's greatest hits was gone. He looked in the mirror and no longer recognized the man staring back. The music had stopped. So had the spark. Then, out of nowhere, came a lifeline. A stranger. A church minister who had never met Smokey called him. She said she had been praying for him for over a year. In her words, God had told her he was on the brink, that if he didn't stop using, he would suffer a stroke. She spoke about things no one else knew: the weight loss, the pain, the emptiness. She said his name had come to her in prayer one day out of nowhere. "I don't know you," she told him, "but I was in my prayer closet and your name came out of my mouth." Smokey walked into her church high. he walked out clean. He never went to rehab. He never relapsed. According to him, that moment, one woman's prayer and his decision to listen, saved his life. It was the miracle he hadn't known he needed. The collapse was quiet, but the comeback was even quieter. Smokey Robinson vanished from the spotlight, and for a time many assumed he had left music behind. What the world didn't see was the slow, steady rebuilding happening behind closed doors. While the stages were empty and the headlines faded, Smokey was putting his life back together, piece by piece. But just when the past seemed to be behind him, it came roaring back in the form of a lawsuit. In 2014, Claudette Robinson re-entered Smokey's life, not with a phone call or a reconciliation, but through legal papers. Decades after their divorce, she sued him over the ownership of the very songs that had defined their golden era. The dispute centered on works Smokey had reclaimed under the 1976 Copyright Act, a powerful law that allowed artists to regain control of songs they had signed away early in their careers, often under exploitative terms. Smokey had filed to recapture full ownership. Claudette pushed back. She wasn't claiming to be a co-writer, she was asserting her rights as a former spouse. Under California's community property law, she argued, those songs belonged to both of them because they were created during their marriage, when she had sacrificed her own career to raise their children and support his. Now, she said, she was being cut out of the legacy she helped build. The lawsuit wasn't just about money, it was about history, partnership, and the pain of being written out of a story she once helped write. The court documents painted a portrait of unresolved wounds, financial entanglements, blurred roles, and a deep silence that lingered long after the marriage ended. Claudette's legal team claimed Smokey had violated a 1989 settlement agreement that was supposed to protect her financial interests in their shared past. They accused him of constructive fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and anticipatory breach of contract, alleging that this wasn't just a business oversight, but a betrayal. Smokey's lawyers pushed back hard. They argued that the law was clear. Recaptured copyrights belonged only to the original author, not to spouses, not to business partners, not even to co-creators, unless explicitly credited. His team said his hands were tied, that legally he couldn't share the rights even if he wanted to. And now, they said, Claudette's challenge was threatening new business deals based on his recovered catalog. The case raised bigger questions, ones the music industry still grapples with. When an artist takes back control of their work, does a former spouse have a right to share in it? What happens when legacy and love collide in court? There was never a final public ruling to settle it all, but the lawsuit left a mark, one that reminded everyone watching that even icons aren't immune to the weight of the past. Claudette Robinson's legal fight with Smokey wasn't just about contracts or royalties. It tapped into a much deeper question: who really built Smokey Robinson's career? And more importantly, who deserved to be remembered beside him? That very question had already erupted in 1987, when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame made a decision that stunned fans and industry insiders alike. That year, Smokey Robinson was inducted, not with the Miracles, but as a solo artist. It should have been a moment of triumph. Smokey walked across the stage in Cleveland, basking in applause, accepting one of the highest honors in music. Tributes poured in. Headlines celebrated his velvet voice, his songwriting genius, and his influence on generations of R&B artists. But behind the cheers was a glaring silence. Where were Ronnie White, Pete Moore, Bobby Rogers, and Claudette Robinson? They weren't just backup singers, they were co-founders of the Miracles, co-writers, road warriors. They were there in the beginning, when Motown was still operating out of a house in Detroit with a hand-painted sign out front. They shaped the group's signature blend of doo-wop, gospel, and romantic pop. They made history together. It was the Miracles, not just Smokey, who delivered Shop Around, Motown's first million-selling single. It was the Miracles who gave the world You've Really Got a Hold on Me, Mickey's Monkey, and Going to a Go-Go. They were the first Motown group to tour the segregated South and the first to appear on national television. But when the Hall of Fame named its inductees, only Smokey's name was on the list. There was no mention of the group, no shared honor, no plaque for the others. The backlash was swift. Fans were furious. Critics called it a historic oversight. Music historians pointed out that Smokey hadn't even charted as a solo artist until long after the Miracles had made him a star. Inside the group, the pain ran deep. Pete Moore and Bobby Rogers expressed quiet disappointment. Claudette Robinson, already battling in court for recognition, was erased from the story once again. Smokey never publicly fought the decision. Some said it wasn't his call. Others believed he should have spoken up. Either way, the moment passed. It took 24 years for the Hall of Fame to make it right. In 2012, the Miracles were finally inducted, decades too late. By then, Bobby Rogers had already passed away. Claudette stood on stage, representing a group that had long been overshadowed. "I've been advocating this for many, many years," Smokey said at the ceremony. "I've always felt the Miracles should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The plaque was updated, the mistake was corrected. But for many fans, the magic of that first moment, the joy of a shared legacy, was lost forever." By the time the Miracles were finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, decades too late, and without all the original members, it became painfully clear just how much Smokey Robinson had lost. He had outlived nearly everyone who helped him build his legacy. And with every funeral, every eulogy, the weight of survival grew heavier. None hit harder than Marvin Gaye. Smokey and Marvin weren't just label mates, they were brothers in rhythm, bonded by music and mutual trust. During the Motown years, they saw each other almost daily. Marvin would call Smokey late at night just to hum a melody over the phone. When Marvin took a creative leap, writing the soul-searching What's Going On, it was Smokey who stood by him. Long before the industry was ready, Smokey believed in Marvin's evolution. Then, in 1984, Marvin was shot and killed by his own father, just one day before his $45th birthday. Smokey was devastated. But Marvin wasn't the first. In 1964, Sam Cooke was taken, shot in a motel under still disputed circumstances. Smokey was only 24, but Sam had been a guiding light, not just for his voice, but for his courage, owning his music, demanding fair treatment in an industry that too often exploited black talent. Sam's murder left a scar that never fully healed. Then came C.L. Franklin, Aretha's father and longtime mentor, who died in 1988. Smokey had known the Franklin family since childhood. Their churches were just blocks apart in Detroit. Aretha herself had been in Smokey's life longer than anyone else in the business. They met when they were 8. When she passed in 2018, Smokey stood at her funeral, addressing presidents, icons, and grieving fans. But his voice was that of a childhood friend, reminiscing about front porch duets and shared dreams on Detroit's North Side. "I didn't think I'd be saying goodbye to you this soon. We've watched so many go." By the time Smokey entered his 80s, he was performing without the people who helped him build the Motown sound. The stages remained, but the voices around him had gone silent. In 2013, Bobby Rogers, his lifelong friend and fellow Miracle, passed away at 73. Known for his harmonies and magnetic stage presence, Bobby had been there since day one, co-writing hits and lighting up stages across the globe. Just 4 years later, Pete Moore, the group's deep bass and brilliant arranger, also died. Pete had co-written timeless classics like Ooh Baby Baby and The Tracks of My Tears. With their passing, Smokey became one of the last living voices from the original Motown era. The dressing rooms grew quieter, the goodbyes more frequent. The spotlight stayed bright, but the journey felt lonelier. The music played on, but now Smokey sang it mostly alone. By 2020, Smokey Robinson had survived it all: addiction, lawsuits, heartbreak, and the loss of nearly everyone who'd walked beside him in the Motown days. At 80 years old, he had outlived legends and endured enough pain for 2 lifetimes. But nothing ever stopped him cold like COVID-19. He caught the virus during its deadliest wave. At first, it felt like simple exhaustion. Then came the breathlessness. His oxygen levels plummeted, and he was rushed to the hospital, alone. No visitors, no music, no movement. The man whose voice once defined a generation could barely speak above a whisper. In interviews afterward, Smokey said the most terrifying part wasn't the fear of death. It was the thought of losing his voice forever. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. Somehow, he made it through. Smokey Robinson gave the world some of the most timeless love songs ever written, but behind the falsetto was deep loss. Behind the smooth image was quiet grief. Behind the romance, ruin. He wasn't just Motown's golden boy. He was a man, flawed, vulnerable, and real. And through it all, he never stopped singing. Even after everything, Smokey Robinson kept writing, kept recording, and kept stepping onto that stage. He may have been shaken, but he never let go of the one thing that carried him through it all: his voice.